Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the midweek program at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the education assistant here at the Arboretum. And today we are on the geophyte border because we have a handful of plants here that have captured the attention and affections of our horticulturist, Tim Alderton. Today we've got a program for you. Top plant picks. We've got Tim's top picks for the month of May. The plants that are looking the best, doing their thing, being as glorious as can be here this time of year at the beginning of May. Those of you watching this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I can pass things over to Tim.
We can trade spaces.
We can trade space. We're going to do some magic here. Whoosh, here we go.
Okay, so I guess my topic for today is Tim's picks for May. So that's often a difficult, or it's actually typically May is a really good month, but the weather has been changing. Things are a little different than what I think they used to be consistently with these warmer weather we've been having in the late winter and spring. It seems like fairly consistently. So it used to be, I probably would have been talking about peonies at this time of the year, or styrax being in full flower, and some of the best things at this time of the year. But for the most part, those are almost basically done or on their tail end of doing their shows this year and the last several years. So changing climate, changing plants, that would be my top picks for this time of the year. I'm starting alphabetically with the ones I selected, and I have about, I think, 8 different genera, and a few of them I have multiple plants within that genera that I'm going to do a little bit of highlight with. So the first one, though, is a group of plants that I truly love, and they don't just do their thing at this time of the year, but they do it throughout the summer, the fall, and sometimes even in the winter. And the one I'm going to highlight is actually, let's see if I can juggle them. I have Abutilon, megapotamicum, and then the cultivar Ruffles. This is Ruffles here. And so Ruffles is a relatively new one for us. Some of the other ones we've had for decades, but Doug Bruin brought this one in when he was here about probably 5 years ago now. And I wasn't sure how hardy it was going to be, but this has been a really good one for us in the garden. And I think Blake has my photos on here, and I have my own things to have in my hand just to have something there. But Ruffles is a megapotamicum, and straight megapotamicum, okay, I have that in my hand now. I don't have a picture of that. It's much smaller. I just kind of got it for reference. And the flowers are actually about the same, or totally different color, but the calyces is the same. So straight megapotamicum is probably about 1/3 the size as Ruffles. Ruffles is a big improvement. It's kind of a creamy yellow instead of a much brighter yellow, egg yolk yellow almost, not quite, but whichever plant, I really like it. And then a counterpart of that we've had for decades and decades and decades, and is probably about the hardiest of the Abutilon megapotamicums, is a little imp, which is, again, it's a much larger flower than straight potamicum, but it's very similar in contrast to that of Ruffles. But Ruffles is also a little bit shorter. Little imp for us has gotten to probably 4 to 5 feet tall after a few years of building up on itself. And Ruffles has gone, it's hopping out about 2.5 to 3 feet tall, which is a little bit more restraint in its growth. But whichever one you get, they are great bloomers for us. It's probably the hardiest species of Abutilon forest, of the showy ones that would typically be considered tropical. And I consider these a subshrub too. I mean, they can act as an herbaceous perennial forest too. And when we have a hard winter, if we get below about 10 degrees, they can die back to the ground. But most winters aren't that cold anymore. So these are already in full flower in the garden, excepting my little imp, because we had to give it a haircut because it's out near the yurt, and, or not the yurt, it's out near the necessary, which is getting its own makeover. Little imp kind of got its own makeover and got a shearing back to the ground, but it's just starting to come back out. But great plant for full sun to half shade. And they will literally flower, I mean, if we have mild weather, 12 months of the year for us. So, but this time of the year, they are really starting to pick up in their heaviest flowering now. So great plant for May. That's my first group there. So who do I have next? I have to look at my list. I have one made. Oh, Oh, this one's actually a tree. I don't do too many trees, you know what I mean? I'm a really woody, an herbaceous plant for the person for the most part, but I think Blake has some really good pictures of this that I put up, or better pictures anyways. Took them this morning. They might be a little over and underexposed depending on the situation, but Acer Bergerianum Michael Steinhardt. And this one I had to look up a little bit about. This is Acer Bergerianum is the trident maple. It's actually become fairly common in this area, but this is a gold leaf form of it, and it's a little more restrained in the growth. Straight Bergerianums, I often see seedlings coming up everywhere around them. So far, so good on Michael Steinhardt, but again, like I said, this is a gold leaf form of trident maple, the Acer Bergerianum, and we have it in our mixed border. It's probably about 15 to 20 feet tall now, and I think we planted it in 2018 if I looked back at the records right the other day. And we got it was about 7 feet tall. And I was kind of just reading about it a little while ago, and they said it gets 10 to 12 feet tall, maybe 15 in 10 years. And I'm thinking, okay, it's a little more vigorous than that. Been a really good plant though. It starts out a chartreuse yellow in the spring. In the high light, it can get orange tones on it during the summer on the newest growth. So that is it almost looks like flowers. It's great. I like things that have foliage interest. Long season of interest, not just pure green. Gold or yellow is wonderful. But this is also noted for having good fall foliage as well, which sometimes we have here in the South and sometimes we don't. And they're saying typically in the fall it takes on yellows, which it already has, red and sometimes purple tones. But for right now, it is just the freshest of bright yellow green foliage, chartreuse, and it stands out in a landscape just like a beacon. And it's rather upright, which is another good feature, so it fits into a smaller landscape. And our straight Bergerianums have been about 25 to 30 feet tall, and maybe, I'm going to say just as wide. This one's supposed to not be quite so wide, which could be a great thing for smaller landscapes, like I said. So that's my second pick for this month. Okay, we're going to move on to something totally different. And I think Blake has some better pictures of the flower, but I do have almost spent inflorescence here and then an actual plant. This is Aloe maculata, or maculatum, I forget. I don't know which one I have it as correct, but it's maculata, I think is what it is. And it's a selection called Fort Worth. And I'm guessing this one came from Fort Worth, Texas, where it tends to be a bit hardier for them down there. And we don't think that we can grow many aloes here, but this one has been here for, I'm gonna say about 7 or 8 years now. And it has been great. We get a little bit of tip damage on the foliage in the winter, but then it flowers in the spring typically, and early summer. And then sporadically you'll get flowering in the fall. And I even cut a stalk off of this before it got super cold in January of all times this year. But really impressed by this plant. We had about 10 stalks on it, and there's still several on it right now. And I expect it to throw up some more flower buds in the near future. But a great succulent. So this you could use, it's not the same one as your aloe vera, but it could be used much in the same way. And but this adds a bit of drought tolerance and a different structure to it. It reminds me of a starfish when you have a couple single rosettes of it. We have a patch that's like 4 or 5 feet wide and 3 or 4 feet deep. So it's really taken off for us in our xeric garden, and I'm really liking that. And these are, like I said, I have better pictures of fresh flowers, but I have an inflorescence here that which is kind of candelabra shaped with some spent blossoms on it right here. But another cool plant, which will take actually our summers really well, and our winters remarkably for an aloe. If it gets a little bit of overhead protection during the winter, it can benefit from that, and a slight slope so that any cold air can kind of filter away from it and not settle into the crowns. But been an all-around really good plant for us, and one I wanted to highlight this month as well. So we have one last A before I get on to some other letters of the alphabet, which Blake was already highlighting this one kind of. This is our pipe vine, Aristolochia fimbriata. And the reason I like the Aristolochia fimbriata, it has multiple purposes for us here. It has wonderful round leaves, which the form we have in this border here, right behind me in particular, has nice silver patterns. There are some forms that are pure green. I have that in the southwest part of the garden, as well as I just noticed one seedling in here. But I've said pipe vine with this, is the common name for the Aristolochias. Most of the pipe vines, including our native macrophylla, which you see a lot in the mountains, get rather large for the home landscape nowadays. They can get rather enormous in reality. The leaves are big, the whole vine is large, and it's a true vine. Well, Aristolochia fimbriata is this herbaceous plant that kind of just sprawls on the ground. It doesn't twine, doesn't overwhelm its neighbors, which is the great thing about it. And it kind of just filters in, acts as a ground cover until the one thing that eats it comes along. That is our pipevine swallowtails. And I think, is that what you're looking for? Or as my caterpillar here? This is a pipevine swallowtail caterpillar. And I get people saying, oh, you have worms on your plants on the border. It's like, that's okay. So I have that plant there, is this pipevine. They will eat every stem, seed pod, flower, leaf they can find and take it down to the ground. And they will do that multiple times throughout the season. But right now we get our freshest growth and the most opportunity to see the foliage. But I want the butterflies too. So this is another of my picks. As earlier when we first got started, there was an adult fluttering around here. It, of course, isn't doing it right now. But at times during the summer, this area of the garden may have 15, 20, even more adults fluttering through here when we have a mass hatching of the adults from out of their chrysalis. Right at this point, we are dealing with larvae for the most part and a few of the overwintering adults. So, but a great one. It takes well-drained soils in full sun. It's not picky about soil moisture as long as it's not wet. It can take evenly moist to dry soils and be happy as a clam in the gardens here. So, and you get the bonus of the bizarre flowers, which I have a photo of the flower, but I have a half-eaten one here that in my hand too, which looks like a Dutchman's pipe, you know, the crooked one that, let's see, Sherlock Holmes might have been smoking from in the old episodes that you would see in when they originally did those. So in the 1800s, the style, it's pretty bizarre. And but the flowers on it are green and brown and some yellow tones, and they have these funky little filaments coming out from the edges of the flowers themselves. But just a really cool plant all around. And like I said, it squeezes in those voids in a perennial border really well, as long as it gets some full sun and maybe light shade. But, oh wow, I'm finding even more caterpillars here. There's a giant one. It's about 2 millimeters across, or long. And then I have one that's about an inch and an inch and a half one. So I have 3 different generations in here in my hand. So, but just a really cool plant. Grow it for your grandkids or kids if you have them. I don't recommend trying to get the caterpillars until you get several of them going though. And it will self-sow lightly. We started with one plant here in the geophyte border, and it has spread about 2/3 of the border. I get Aristolochia in now. And it's just, like I said, it's a pleasantly, not weedy plant, but it pops up in a pleasant way. And you can get rid of it if you need to. It's easy enough to dig out. And it has a root that's more like that of a carrot. It's big and thick, and it can deal with any hot, dry weather we have in the summer. So that's another of my May picks. So now we get to go to something else. And I have to see what that something else is. I need to catch a swallow of water here. It is a little bit warmer today than the last several months when we've been doing these. So I need to stay hydrated. Okay. My next one is actually one of the plants that's right next to me, and I have a couple other counterparts of this one. And I think we'll start with the first one, which, alphabetically speaking, which is Dichelostemum congestum, which I have some flower stalks of this cut, but there's some decent pictures I think I took earlier this morning. Dichelostemum is a genus of bulbs typically found in the western United States, northern Mexico. It may venture into the southwesternmost parts of Canada as well, so in southern British Columbia. Some species go as far east as New Mexico and Colorado, but they're predominantly found in California, and Oregon and Washington, and that's where you're going to find this species here. This is Dichelostemum congestum, and I forget what the common name we have on our labels, but the one I find the most interesting is one we aren't using called Blue Dicks. I can remember that one. But anyways, I had the opportunity to see this in flower several years ago in the wild of Oregon, actually. So this one is pretty cool for me to, and I have great remembrances of this, seeing it on coastal Oregon as well as on some oak savannas that were out there. But really cool late April and May flowering bulb. They come up, start leafing out, say as early as January. They do their whole life. They start to senesce about the same time as they come into flower, and they go dormant by the end of May. So this is an April-May bloomer for us and grower. And just, it actually makes a pretty good cut flower. I don't have any issues with rabbits on this one. Deer, I doubt would touch it either, being that rabbits don't like it. I don't have deer in the gardens. The squirrels don't even dig up the bulbs. So this is a great plant for me. So, but anyways, like this plant, this is Dichelostemum congestum. So I'm going to skip over. I think I have a hybrid, which we'll talk about later, but we're going to skip to the one that's right next to me. Alphabetically, this was a little bit different. This is Dichelostemum Ida May, and this is one, I don't know, I might mention this one next week in my in-person tour too, because I just love the name. Ida May brings thoughts of motherly things, doesn't it? That name, but I love the red with kind of a creamy yellow petals on the tips with green little bracts. I don't even know all the morphological parts to these flowers. These are a little different than some things. They're in their own family, if I remember correctly, but closely related to Tritoletias and Barodia, which are two other bulbs that you find out in western United States. But I have a big patch of this right next to me here in the geophyte border, and you put these together and you get another species, or a hybrid actually, and I have it back behind me. So this is a presumed hybrid between the two of these. This is Dichelostemum pink diamond. It's occurred in the wild, but this form occurs in the wild, but they have given a cultivar name to it. And sometimes you'll see it just as a congestum, which it looks nothing like congestum to me. It looks like a combo between congestum and Ida May. And Ida May is mostly found in California and a little bit of southwestern Oregon. So it doesn't have quite this the same distribution as the congestum, but they do overlap, and so you get these naturally occurring hybrids, which are then called, well, commercially anyways, pink diamond. And all three of these can be found. We got these bulbs years ago from Brenton Becky's, and love them. And like I said, deer and rabbit resistant. Squirrels don't like the bulbs. Can't go wrong there with that in there. And they make wonderful cut flowers, and they are great because you can grow them up through other things that come up later on, because they do die down early, and you can have some later perennials that come up later, and their foliage will be dying down as they come up, and they will be perfectly happy. They like to be summer dry, but as long as you're not growing in a wet soil, they will be content as ever in full sun. Maybe a little bit of shade, but my picks there are the Dichelostemum collection of the day. Oh, here I have a honeybee trying to look at this a bit. And I'm guessing item A is being pollinated in the wild by hummingbirds. And that's probably how the Dichelostemum congestum typically doesn't cross with item A. It would be that they don't get pollinated as often by hummingbirds because it's not as tubular. But when that happens, it happens and you get pink diamond. Really cool plants and bulbs there. So who do I have next on my list? Oh, my glandularias. Does everybody know what glandularia is? You'll recognize it when I show you. So I'm not always overly big on these, but this is some of the verbenas that we grow commercially that you find in containers. And for spring sale, they're great in baskets. And I planted some in the perennial border last year, and because they should be, I thought they'd be interesting to see what happens. Some of them have been hardy, some of them not, and these were two excellent ones for us this past year. So I call them glandularia, which is where they're being classified now, but you'll see them as verbena. I have two different ones here. This soft pink one here, which is super, 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 super vigorous and boisterous. It gets about 12 to 15 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. One plant can do that. This is one from the trials last year, and I'll tell you its real name, and then I'll tell you the name you'll find it as. So it's glandularia, and this is, the pink one here is WNVERSVPC24. Known as Superbena Pink Cashmere, which is what you're going to find it as at your local nursery or garden center. And I did not expect myself to be impressed by this plant, but I am truly impressed. It's been already flowering for us in the garden, in the wide open spaces where we didn't rip it out of the color trials. It's made of an enormous patch. I have it in the perennial border. There's a patch in our horticultural field lab that was left in a container, and they've all been flowering for about a month and a half, and I expect this to go on for probably the next month. It may take a short vacation in the summer. If I cut it back, it'll probably refresh it a little bit more, but and then it'll perk back up again in the fall. It has just been smothered in these soft pink flowers that they start out light pink and they fade almost to white with just a blush of pink in the center. And that's a bit bigger and more boisterous growing. And then there is this second one, which I planted out as well. I have a couple others, but these two are the ones that impressed me most and look great right now. And I expect them to look great for the near future. This is, like I said, I'll tell you the real name and then I'll tell you what you'll find it as. This is glandularia KLEVP22039. Catchy name there. You'll find it commercially as Lascar, which is LASCAR. Orange lava, and it is kind of like lava. It is that hot color and it stays flat on the ground. This first one was the cashmere, or pink cashmere, got about like 12 to 15 feet or inches tall, I should say, while this one gets 3 to 4 if it's lucky, but it goes horizontal about 4 feet as well, and it's been flowering for about a month and a half already, and it shows no signs of stopping. We got this and had this in our container trials last year, and it has made a wonderful presence in our perennial border. And these are both my picks again for this month. They're, of course, ground covers in this sense, and these will keep on going, unlike our last ones, which are strictly for the month of May. But some big picks there. So I have another one, which is going to be the whole species. Hydrangea quercifolias do most of their flowering for us here in the Raleigh area in particular during May. They're just about, they're opening. Some of the earliest ones are actually open now, while the rest of them are just coming into bud, or so they should be in flower in the next week or so in the garden. And the one I have in my hand, we also have photos of. It's not quite open, but this is Hydrangea quercifolia Little Honey, which Little Honey is one I've always loved. We've had it longer than I've been here at the Arboretum. There's one behind our visitor center, and I have one in a container, a very large container, and then there's another one in the ground, actually not terribly far from where it was at. But Little Honey, as you can see, is grown for its bright yellow foliage again, much like that maple I showed you earlier on, which I do like yellow foliage. You might catch on with that. And again, multi-seasons of interest, even before and after it's in flower. I still have the chartreuse foliage on this. So it makes a wonderful presence. Pretty much all of the hydrangea quercifolias are going to have white flowers. If you're lucky and live in a cooler climate than we are here, you may get them to fade to a pink. Doesn't typically happen for us here in the Raleigh area. We just get too hot and they senesce, but I don't care. I just want to grow the oak-leafed hydrangeas. They give us really actually 4 seasons of interest between the foliage, and which is there the entire summer, whether it's chartreuse or green. I don't know of any variegated ones offhand of those. The shape of it is wonderful, and it will take half shade to even sun in reality. And they're fairly drought tolerant, like so many of the Asian hydrangeas that we have to baby. And like I say, they are dehydrangeas instead of hydrangeas. Hydrangea quercifolia will droop a little at midday or in full sun, but it tends to recover without too much of an issue, as long as it's not perpetually dry. Also, I said about the foliage, but throughout the winter months, once half of the foliage tends to fall off, you can see the stems, which are often on older plants, especially exfoliating cinnamon bark. So you get cinnamon, and actually you can see it maybe on this branch, this even twig, even the new growth has cinnamon and dementum on the new growth. So, but the branches and twigs in the winter have really nice bark as well. So that's another reason to grow that as well. So that was, in general, is one of my picks. And I think I have pictures of Semis Beauty, which is just actually down near the Lath House. And it's just opening right now, and it's a few weeks ahead of Little Honey, but it's going to be spectacular here in the next week and going in through the whole month of May. I think I have one last plant on here, and I don't have a sample of it because it's already, it's a morning plant. It's not one that likes to spend the afternoon out in the sun. Even though it can take the sun, the flowers senesce quickly. And so I'm hoping Blake can bring that up. It's Linum Lewisii. And this one is kind of sentimental to me because the Linum Lewisii we have in the garden is originated from seed I collected in 2001 on a trip to Utah. And we stopped along a mountain road outside of Moab at about 8,000 feet, and I collected a handful of seed. I mean, actually, it might have been 15, 20 seeds off of a spent plant, and we germinated it, and I've gotten them growing in the garden, and I just find it so remarkable that you can have this spectacular blue Lewisia or flax growing here in Raleigh when I collected it at 8,000 feet and we're at 300. Though the species in general, it has a much wider distribution. It ranges from northern Mexico, so that probably gives it some of its heat tolerance, but it goes the whole way up into southern Alaska too. So it has this great range, and again, it has just been a really good plant for us. It has blue-green foliage that looks kind of evergreen-esque. It is a semi-evergreen plant for us in general. So even before it comes into flower, it has a really nice presence in the garden. It tops out at about 12 to 15 inches. Very airy. Last summer, they flowered into pretty much all summer into the fall. If I'd sheared them back, they probably would have looked a little fresher, but it just kept on going. I am getting some seeding in the garden on it, but it tends to be in open areas. It's not in a mulch bed, it's on the edges. It has been flowering for about almost over a month. I've had a few flowers, but it's been in full flower for the last 3 weeks. We had hoped to have some at our plant sale this past week, but we had taken tons of cuttings last fall, and Sophia sold them all by February. So I'm guessing some of you may actually have this plant in your garden, or I'm hoping some of you have this plant in your garden. at home already. So, and it's flowering as well. But been a wonderful plant for us in the garden as well. And it will continue, like I said, in through the summer months, continue flowering, but it will not look as fresh as it does now. But it's a morning flower. Like I said, the flowers only last about half. They open in late evening, early through and overnight, and then they close by midday, and the flower petals shed then. But it has a profusion of literally hundreds of flowers at any one time though. So those are my picks for this month. Do we have any questions?
Not too many questions, a handful of questions. I would invite all of you to drop whatever questions you have in the chat and we can have them answered. But Marilyn did start us off with the question that Marilyn normally asks. She wants to know if deer will eat the glandularias, the verbenas.
That I don't know. I don't think they're overly delicious, but they may eat it some. I'm guessing the hairs on it might inhibit a little bit of the browsing. It is in the mint family theoretically now instead of its own. At times it's been placed in the Verbinaceae, but split out. But it's one I can't say 100%. And again, sometimes those deer, it's like there's certain foods I don't like. I had lunch with some friends from back home in Pennsylvania, and I took them to I took them to Neomon down the street, and of course, that was a stretch for them to eat that stuff. So I'm thinking the deer are sometimes the same way. We don't always like the same thing. So it might depend on her population. We'd have to try though. I think it has the characteristics that might deter them from eating it too much.
Nice.
The rabbits haven't bothered even much. So that typically is more of an indicator to me.
Cool. Okay, so Dina said that you mentioned a plant by the name of Lascar. That'll be
Lascar. That's the glandularia or verbena. Sure. Lascar orange lava, which has a lovely real name of KLEV P22039. Just flows right off the tongue.
Awesome. She asked for more info, but
that's when we received from Ball Horticulture last year in our trials. So I wouldn't be surprised if you can start to find that one at your home and garden centers. Hopefully your nurseries and garden centers will start to carry that. We had it, like I said, in our color trial container trials last year. We didn't actually have it in the beds for that one last summer, but I stuck some of the extras in the border, and I've been so impressed with that plant. It is very, I mean, if you need a low growing ground cover in full sun, it might be one to try.
Awesome.
And you might be able to find it online to order it if you can't find it actually locally.
Sure enough. Alrighty, Sophia just chimed in. Will Hydrangea quercifolia Little Honey tolerate almost full shade, and does it require a rich soil? Hydrangea quercifolia actually aren't as picky as macrophyllus. They don't need excessively rich, but they would prefer a little bit better than normal average soil. I mean, they don't want to grow in pure sand, and they don't want to be totally dry, but they are much more drought tolerant than your traditional macrophyllas, maybe up there with your paniculatas, but for full shade, it'll take a reasonable amount of shade. On our original plant is behind the visitor center, and it kind of reaches out around the corner. It doesn't get much direct sun unless the sun is really high up and squeezes down between the live oak that is kind of outstretching over top of it. We also have an Acer japonicum that's kind of covering it up. And it does fine. So I won't say full dense shade, but it can take a fair amount of shade. It won't burn there. If you get it in full sun, you might get a little bit of leaf burn. So the shade side is probably okay. And it has big leaves. It made itself so that it's able to soak up as much light as it can, and it leaves out new flush typically earlier than, say, many of your deciduous trees. So as long as you aren't doing it under an evergreen shade, you're probably okay. So will the shade, will it affect how much it flowers?
It might, I mean, and less light, you're probably gonna have fewer inflorescence. It may be a little less vigorous, but it's still been pretty darn good behind the visitor center for the last, let's say 20 years. So.
And does the shade affect the color of the?
It will be a bright chartreusey green. It might not have as bright yellow, but if you get, like I said, there's a happy spot, partial shade, part sun to partial shade, that perfect zone is where you're going to get the best color without any burn. And it'll have really good color. If you get in the full sun, you might end up getting some burn, but you'll even have brighter yellow growth on it as well.
And she also wants to know the origin of that cultivar.
Okay, so it is a mutation from one called Peewee, which is not PG, but Peewee, which is another compact, as its name says, or it sounds like, quercifolia that's been around for decades. And I have that one back home in Pennsylvania, but I don't have Little Honey there. But it's even more compact than Little Honey in my experience. So Little Honey is pretty vigorous despite the fact it is chartreuse.
How available is Little Honey?
Little Honey should be available. I mean, we've had it for I'd say about 20 years because it's been here for a year or two longer than me.
Sure.
So, and I've been here over 18 years. So
no kidding. And it's a really sweet and charismatic plant.
It is. And I think the patent will be coming up if it's not.
Oh, yeah.
Already now. So
that's always exciting. All righty. Well, that seems to be all of the questions that we have in the chat.
So I'm hoping I gave some people some inspiration of things that might be good for their garden here in the Raleigh area, at least in the future and for the month of May.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tim, for pulling this together. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We will be back next Wednesday at 3 o'clock with the midweek program. We've got Mark on the schedule to do plants you didn't realize were edible. Of course, we had to use a cardboard cutout of Mark for the last 2 times he was on the schedule. So
hopefully he doesn't bail on us.
Yeah, hopefully. We'll see what happens. Make sure you're here and start a betting pool and get us all involved. It'll be exciting to see. We'll see you all next time. Y'all take care.